Hello and welcome to Real Talk. Thank you for joining us. We want to do a shout out to the whole continent of Australia.
That's a big shout out.
Someone from Australia messaged that they appreciated how we with sensitivity discuss forgiveness, and we really do try to talk about the real life stuff, but with some sensitivity. So shout out to Australia.
Thanks, Australia.
We want to come visit you in person.
I know, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So this week, Standing in Holy Places, section 85 through 87. And I was going to joke with starting out with the still small voice and whispering it, but we don't want to scare our sound guy.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to whisper and then have it be a problem.
Yeah, no kidding.
But verse 6 says, Yea, thus saith the still small voice, which whispereth through and pierceth all things, and oftentimes it maketh my bones to quake while it maketh manifest saying. And I love that idea that the quiet whisper pierces and makes you shake. And I just wondered if we really consider how that still small voice sometimes feels so familiar that I think we discount it because it feels familiar. Yeah. But I like to remind myself that God's not going to whisper through the Spirit to me in a language I don't understand or in a voice that I won't recognize. Yeah. And so if it feels familiar, I just had this happen, and I wanted to ask you where you've had it happen in your life, because I think we could probably do hours of episodes about just the still small voice.
Yeah, for sure.
But recently I was invited to speak somewhere, and in my mind and on the calendar for months, it had been at this one location. So I knew when I had to leave, and it was going to be quite a bit of a distance to drive to it. And 2 days before, I had the prompting, and it was a whisper, but I kind of ignored it because I was like, I think it's just because I'm stressed and I don't really need to double check the address. And I went back to my calendar and I felt like that would appease the Spirit, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, yeah, the address is, this is where I think it is. And then I heard it again a couple days later. And finally I stopped and messaged the organizer, and oh no, it was literally, instead of 2 hours north, it was 3.5 hours south.
You were way off.
So way off. By the way, there's 2 areas with the same name, one in Cache Valley, one down near Beaver. So,
Yeah.
That's an extra fun fact if anyone needs to know that. So in finding that out, it changed the whole dynamics, but it also led to a really unique situation where I had a Real Talk fan reach out, and they were interested in where I was speaking next, but they live close to this location that was very remote. So that's just one example, not to go on and on about it, but I did ignore it at first, and then it kind of whispered a little more naggingly.
Yeah.
What experience have you had with the still small voice of verse 6?
Well, I'll say one quick thing. So Elder Bednar does something you said earlier. Elder Bednar, in a training for seminary and institute teachers, I believe it was last year, he talked about this. And he said, he talked about maybe a better question isn't when did you feel it?
Yes.
Maybe a better question is when do you not?
Right.
And maybe start there, because he said we feel it so often, sometimes it becomes just a natural part of our internal voice and internal compass,
right?
Where almost the Holy Ghost turns us into a Liahona,
right.
And we just go in that direction.
Right.
And so, but I'll give you one, and I have no idea. I believe this is the Spirit, but it's still too new, but who knows? We'll see.
But that's why I wanted
fun.
you to share it.
Yeah, I'll report back if I ever know.
Because sometimes we think like, oh, that's obvious, the Spirit. Yeah.
So I was washing my car because it looked disgusting. So I was washing it and I was vacuuming it out at this car wash place, this car wash palace, you know how they are these days. And as I'm vacuuming my car out, I'm totally in like mindless cleaning mode. And it took me quite a while, but about halfway through, as I'm vacuuming, I legitimately hear this, sell your car. And I looked up and I looked around me because I thought someone was behind me. I was like, and I just sat there. And I think when it says the Spirit can shake you, I actually think sometimes the Spirit will say things that will stop you in your tracks. It will shake you out of your like mindless thought process.
Or the direction you were heading.
Or the direction or whatever. And so I just paused and I was like, that is so random. And I kind of laughed in my own mind about it. And so I just started thinking about it, and it didn't make sense. We paid the car off. I was saving it. My son's going to start driving here in the next 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, it'd be a perfect car because if he wrecked it, who cares, and all this stuff. And so I start rationalizing as we do. But anyway, I decided, you know what, let's just try it. And so I acted on it, and I sold that car and bought a new car. So we'll see. But as of right now, I mean,
you acted on
2 weeks, 2 weeks into it, we'll see.
Okay.
So I don't know for sure, and I don't even know if God will ever reveal that to me, but I want to be a person who, when I get a prompting, I try and follow it if I can.
Right. And that whisper idea is also, how do we put ourselves, as Elder Bednar taught, in the channel and assume that we're still in the channel?
Yeah.
And Vicky Matsumori said a really great quote we have included in the Real Talk Journal on page 88, where she says, because the Spirit is often described as a still, small voice, it is also important to have a time of quiet in our lives as well. And she talks about the television, the computer, the video games, all the electronic devices. If we don't allow that still small voice an opportunity to provide that personal revelation, or while you're vacuuming your car, right? That whisper and that guidance to comfort us, we may miss it. And so I think we've talked about going to low traffic areas, and I think that's just an example of where, when the chatter gets too loud in my life, I'm almost aware that I've stepped out of that, what I call the channel that Elder Bednar taught to the seminary teachers. And I just need to readjust so that there's a little more stillness, so I'm not missing things. And I think the discussions this week are going to be interesting in our homes about what that still small voice. So that's what I wanted to say for section 85, verse 6. There's going to be a lot of good discussion about being tuned into that, acting upon it like you did, and maybe waiting and seeing. I was able to be shown within a week that, yes, I needed to check and double check and go to the right direction.
And I may never know.
Right.
That's kind of the funny thing about it. So, but I'm okay with that.
But it is a nice car. Just saying.
Well, for me. All right, so section 85, I'm going to do something for sake of time that I don't normally do. So this is about William McClellan. He made a covenant to live the law of consecration, but then bought 2 properties on Main Street in his own name and didn't abide the covenant in which he committed to live by. And so we get section 85 as part of that. And I'm just going to point out in here one thing, verse 8, it talks about putting forth your hand to steady the ark, which is an Old Testament story. I'm not even going to get into that. If you want to read it, just go to the footnote, verse 8a, and you can read that story.
Or join us in season 3.
Or join us in season 3. So what I want to get to with this is, normally I try and give a little more historical background. What did it mean to William McClellan to get this revelation? But I'm just, for sake of time, going to jump right into relevance. And that is, this seems to me to be a revelation, or a place where I can stop and say, okay, is what a prophet says, is a commandment always from God, or something? Like, is it from the person or the prophet? I should have said that better. But
so you're saying, is the counsel always prophetic? Yeah,
or is it often just good advice that can be very useful but may not be prophetic? And so I'm going to run through a couple of things here, and we'll see how this goes.
Okay.
And so Elder Christofferson, here's two quotes I use all the time. So Elder Christofferson said recently, it should be remembered that not every statement made by a church leader, past or present, necessarily constitutes doctrine. It is commonly understood in the church that a statement made by one leader on a single occasion often represents personal, though well-considered opinion, not meant to be officially binding for the whole church. The prophet Joseph Smith taught a prophet is only a prophet when he is acting as such. And I know that can help hone in, and there's also some questions that come from that. Elder Neil L. Anderson, he taught this in October 2012. He said, the doctrine of Christ is taught by all 15 members of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12. It is not hidden in an obscure paragraph of one talk. True principles are taught frequently and by many. Our doctrine is not difficult to find.
It's a good litmus test.
Yeah, and so that's a good way of looking at it. So I have a few examples of where prophets give
Did you put it in a chart?
Well, no, I didn't. No, not today.
Okay.
I should have, though. Where prophets, we know that they gave, they were their opinions, though well thought out, but ended up being wrong. So while Joseph Fielding Smith was the president of the Quorum of the 12, he wrote in one of his books, one of his many books, This was in 1957. He wrote, "It is doubtful that a man will ever be permitted to make an instrument or ship to travel through space and visit the moon or any distant planet." I love how you're laughing already because you're like,
Well,
oh no,
at the time-
Joseph Fielding,
listen, recently, Jeff Bezos and
Elon Musk.
Virgin Atlantic.
Oh, Virgin Atlantic.
They just both privately went to space, so
Yeah.
that's why I'm laughing.
So you're like, oh.
It's all over the news that some people just chose to go.
Yeah, exactly. So that was in 1957. We all know in July 1969, we landed on the moon.
Right.
So 6 months later, after we landed on the moon.
This is the best.
I know, it's so great. So 6 months later, it's January 23rd of 1970 now. And President Joseph Fielding Smith is now filling the role as prophet, seer, and revelator for the church. And in the news conference, according to someone who listened to the press conference, President Smith replied, they asked him about it, he replied, "Well, I was wrong, wasn't I?" And that was how he addressed it.
I love that. I was wrong.
So I was wrong, and that would be an example of a well thought out opinion ended up being wrong. Let me give you one that's maybe a little bit more useful, I think. So hopefully this is for you.
This is the sensitive one.
Well, let's talk about kingdoms of glory.
Okay.
So you get
There
the
were a
question
lot of questions about it.
and there still are. Is there progression through kingdoms? Yes or no? And that's kind of how we frame it. So let me give you a few quotes here. So Brigham Young, what do you think he's going to say? Don't answer that. All right, Brigham Young, 1855, speaking of those in the telestial and terrestrial glories, as recorded by Wilford Woodruff in his journal, he said they would eventually have the privilege of proving themselves worthy and advancing to a celestial kingdom, but it would be a slow progress. So that is yes, it just might take a long time. James E. Talmage in the Articles of Faith says advancement from grade to grade within any kingdom and from kingdom to kingdom will be provided for. Eternity is progressive. So he says yes. J. Reuben Clark, he talks about spirit world, and then from there he says the unrighteous will have their chance, and in the eons of eternities that are to follow, they too may climb to the destinies to which those who are righteous and serve God have climbed. So he says yes in that quote. And then B.H. Roberts, speaking of the ministry of Jesus to the terrestrial and the Holy Ghost to the telestial, that's out of 76. We know that you can minister to quote unquote lower kingdoms. He said that would be meaningless. Why would we minister to other kingdoms unless for the purpose of advancing our children, our
Right.
Father's children, along the lines of eternal progress? So they all say yes. And then we get this. Bruce R. McConkie. He says, this is at a famous BYU talk called 7 Deadly Heresies. And here's one of them. There are those who say that there is progression from one kingdom to another in eternal worlds, and if not, lower kingdoms eventually progress to where higher kingdoms once were. Here it is. This is worse than false. It is an evil and pernicious doctrine. So here we go, right? President Spencer W. Kimball in The Miracle of Forgiveness. After a person has been assigned to his place in the kingdom, either the telestial or terrestrial or celestial, or to his exaltation, he will never advance from his assigned glory to another. That is eternal. That is why we must make our decisions early in life and why it is imperative that such decisions are right.
Okay, Scott, I feel like you have now, you've opened up a whole bunch of wounds. Please tell me you're going to resolve it.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not. So, well, I am. I'm going to give you a different way of thinking about
Okay.
it. So in the quote from Elder Anderson, he says, the collective voice of the Quorum of the 12. And I know this is taking too long, but the only thing that we have officially from the general voice of the Quorum of the 12, it was back in 1965. And it's from the First Presidency, and this is Joseph L. Anderson, the Secretary of the First Presidency. Quote, "The brethren direct me to say that the church has never announced a definite doctrine upon this point," speaking of eternal progression through kingdoms. "Though some have held the view that it was possible in the course of progression to advance from one glory to another, invoking the principle of eternal progression, others have taken an opposite view." So I just read you those. "As indicated, however, the church has never announced a definite doctrine on this point." So I don't know if that's satisfying, but here's my next thought from there. So those are well thought out opinions, and we just don't know yet. So what I would say is, choose to believe which one resonates the most with you, but be very open to also knowing that you might be wrong.
Well,
might be.
We talked about last week being a pliable people, and I think ongoing revelation means ongoing.
Yeah.
And we may receive additional clarification by future leaders.
Yeah. And we may not.
That are helpful.
It might not be until after the second coming of Christ. But so, in my opinion, something like that is choose which one resonates with you the most, but be pliable enough to recognize it might be the other one or it might be something else entirely that we haven't considered.
Okay. Well, there you go.
That took too long.
No,
Thank you for listening.
No, I think it's a helpful thing that has at times been problematic and will continue to be.
Well, and we know it with the race and the priesthood
Right.
essay. The
Right.
church came out in that essay, if you haven't read it, and disavows some of the opinions
That
that
have
were
been
previously taught by previous leaders, including apostles and prophets of the church. And they've disavowed those and said, no, those are not correct.
Right.
So we've done that in that realm as well.
Because good news for all of us, God works with our personalities, our weaknesses, and our strengths,
Yeah.
right? And that's who he has to work with.
Yep.
So let's jump to section 86.
Let's do it.
And talk about angels.
Okay.
So to revisit the spiritual prompting with the still small voice, to double check the address.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And I drove
Yeah.
now 3 hours in a different direction. I was encountered a number of roadblocks, literally, like a bike race and cows. Lots of cows. And no GPS, and cows covering the road, and then up a steep incline. And I'm going to just shorten this by saying, verse 5 of section 86, behold, verily I say unto you, the angels are crying unto the Lord day and night, who are ready and waiting to be sent forth to reap down the fields. Now, when you read that verse, these are different kinds of angels. These are angels that are willing to come fight your battles, and we see the reaping in the fields. But I will say that in this situation, I was on the Lord's errand, and I felt multiple times on this journey that there were angels that were there to help open up the pathways, and not that these cows or these bikers were my enemies, but I needed help because I was trying to get to a speaking event that I was still 20 minutes delayed, but I made it to the location without the GPS help. And I have hundreds of those stories of where angels have helped move the cows out of the road, wherever that is logistically in my life.
Part the sea of cows.
Exactly. So what a great opportunity this week to have a discussion. Wilford Woodruff talks about that the angels are waiting in their places in the temple for the time to come when they will be called upon to go forth and reap down the earth, which I think is a pretty significant statement about the kind of angels at our disposal. Elder Holland has talked about angels. We talked about it with Tim Ballard on the Friends episode that I still get comments about, where Elder Holland has talked about, I testify that angels are still sent to help us. And I testify when cows are on the road.
Even when cows are on the road.
Even when cows are on the road. So what are your thoughts on section 86?
86, all I will say is when you go through verse 7, I like this, there's an order to the harvest. So there's kind of a 3 general phases of the harvest. The first is let the wheat and the tares grow together until the harvest is fully ripe. The second, then ye shall first gather out the wheat from among the tares. And the third then is going to the angels
that are going to the field.
That are going in the fields. The gatherers of the wheat, after the gatherers of the wheat, behold, and lo, the tares are bound in bundles, and the field remaineth to be burned. And so I would just think, which phase are we, based on what President Nelson is teaching, what phase of the harvest are we probably in right now? And I don't pretend to know exactly. I have my own personal thoughts on that, but I think we're definitely... My personal thought is we're definitely in the second phase, moving to the third, but I could be wrong.
So we're going to need angels.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and they'll do work we just can't do on our own, which is okay.
Do you have anything you want to share about section 87?
I have so much to share about 87.
Let's do it.
The best part about 87 is the section was revealed on Christmas Day.
And I love Christmas.
I know.
Almost wore my T-shirt that says Christmas in July. That's how it should always be. And
Yeah.
so, I agree with that
So
statement.
if you want to celebrate Christmas in August,
Yes.
then you can do this. I do this with my students, and it's just basically, what's your favorite Christmas present? We talk about Christmas joy and presents and stuff like that.
And then
you say, okay, Joseph Smith receives a revelation on Christmas Day. What do you think it's going to be about? And then we start talking about all these joyful, and we all come up with the same principles, and they're all taught in the Christmas devotionals, right? That we hear every year from
Hope,
our first
joy.
president. Light, love,
Yes.
and all of that
Angels.
stuff. So section 87 might be a little jarring because it is a prophecy of war. Now, it seems to specifically talk about the Civil War, which, depending on which numbers you look at, on the low end is about 600,000
Massive.
people died. On the high end, it's, I think, over almost close to 800,000. And so that's what this revelation seems to be specifically prophesying about, is something to the Civil War, but generally prophesying about the wars in the last days and how do we deal with them. And so you can go through and read and you're just like, oh my gosh, Christmas present, mourn, famine, plague, earthquake, thunder of heaven, lightning. That's all in verse 6. And you can read, there's a bunch of other ones in there as well. And you're like, Merry Christmas, Joseph, right? But there is one verse in there that maybe we should finish on this, which is the theme of the section. It comes from verse 8, 87:8.
Right, which is my favorite.
Yeah. Wherefore stand ye in holy places, and be not moved until the day of the Lord come. For behold, it cometh quickly, saith the Lord. So in there's a, what do I do about it, and give me a promise. And that seems to be maybe a decent Christmas gift.
And I love thinking about a holy place beyond a temple, which it obviously is, but it's our home. And we've had conversations that it can be within our souls. And so if we stand in that holy place from a mental health perspective and be not moved, what does that require so that we're not pushed off that place of peace? As the, analogy, the storm is going around you, but the center of that storm is the calm. I really think verse 8 is inviting us to stand in the holy place, not just within the temples, which obviously are, and our churches and our homes, but within our hearts. So what does that require from us so that we can fundamentally stand still and be not moved?
Yeah, and that phrase, and they left it out of the title on this, be not moved. I think that's we focus so much on standing in holy places that we forget about the and
Right.
be not moved.
And
do you have any comments on that?
Well, I would just suggest, especially with mental health, that you will be moved. And you shared this on some other principles. You will be deceived.
Yeah.
So you will be moved.
Yeah.
It's about returning. So know that you're aware, and then try to recalibrate so that you're not moved for another half hour or day or whatever that is. And
or
learning
minutes,
right, and learning how to do that process, you may have to become more mindful of what moves you so you can counterbalance that with your agency. That's what I would say.
So let me give you one verse that's helped me with this. I'm starting to realize the beauty of it 20 years later.
The living scripture.
I found this on my mission, and it became really helpful in that when I felt moved, how to bring me back. And it's when Joseph Smith is in Liberty Jail. And it's the very last verse that we get.
Which would not be considered maybe a holy place, but really
war,
is.
which is interesting.
Elder Holland.
Elder Holland gave that, where he turned it into a temple.
Yeah.
It became a temple dungeon or something
Right.
like that. But anyway, he when it's talking about be not moved, section 123, verse 17, Joseph in that battle says, wherefore, dearly beloved brethren, let us cheerfully do all things that lie in our power. Just do what you can, and do it with as much cheer as you can muster. And then may we stand still, be not moved, right? Then may we stand still with the utmost assurance to see the salvation of God and for his arm to be revealed. So that's been a counterbalancing scripture for me. And we've used this in my family. Let's just do cheerfully whatever we can. And sometimes whatever we can when we've really been displaced is not much. And so, but you just do it and try and do it as positively as you can and just be not moved. And that's okay.
I love that was coming with the war chapter, because the Lord was validating what was to come and what will still come.
Yeah, and to be honest, we'll do this next week, but section 88 could also be, this was during Christmas break.
And then we fill the follow-up, right?
Yeah, exactly. So our invitation this week is, how can you stand in holy places, or make the places where you stand holy, And maybe even more specifically, be not moved. Is there things you can do or things you're already doing that you can define scripturally as, I'm gonna not be moved here. Even if I can only do a little bit, I'm not gonna move here. And I would encourage you to think about those things that you can do and how you can support family and friends so to help them be not moved as well. Thank you again for joining us on another episode of Real Talk. We'll see you next week. You guys, please like and subscribe and click the bell.
Like and subscribe.
What did I say?
You did it. It was
Like
perfect.
and subscribe
That was so perfect.
and click the bell. Just do it.